Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast, where we talk to customers and experts about how to create products and services that feel like time well spent. And now, here are your hosts, experienced strategists, Dave Norton and Aransas Savas.
Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast. I'm Aransas Savas.
And I'm Dave Norton.
And today we have an extra special episode in store for you. One of the things we haven't done in a while is bring in the founder of a small and growing business to talk about their real life experience strategy challenges. So we thought it was high time. And instead of just bringing in any old founder, we brought in our very own podcast producer, Traci DeForge, the founder and CEO of Produce Your Podcast. And today we're going to talk about how her business and her customer needs and her experience strategy have evolved over some dynamic and interesting times in her category, and what's next as she grows her impact and her business. Traci, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's so great to see you guys, literally.
This is so fun. And our engineer, of course, is Traci's long-term collaborator, Russ. So we've really got the whole family together today. So really, really excited to get the gang together here. So Traci, let's start with a little history lesson if we can. When you started Produce Your Podcast, what were you trying to do?
Well, I'm much better at storytelling. So I think I actually have to go back one step before that, which is when I started my own, what I call the flagship podcast, the very first podcast that I ever created. And you are so connected to that story, which makes it a little bit fun. And we were working together with Weight Watchers International at the time and working on a project that really motivated me to want to start my first podcast, which was Journey to There. And I was leaving the event in Minneapolis that we co-produced together, Aransas and I worked on together, and I actually texted Russ from the airport and I said, "Do you produce podcasts?" And his response back was, "For you, I would." And that was the beginning of a really long and amazing relationship that had already pre-existed probably 20 years prior. Russ and I had worked together in broadcast radio together. He was actually at the radio station the first day I went to work there in 1993. Sorry, Russ, I just dated you and me. So that was how I knew I wanted to start a podcast, and I knew based on my broadcast radio experience that I wanted it to be a quality show. I also knew what that was going to take in terms of a team and all of the elements to keep it sustainable. And so pulled the team together, launched Journey to There, and swiftly after that realized that podcasting was going to be a huge marketing platform for businesses, for service-based businesses, product-based businesses, and this was in 2016. So we were a bit ahead of the curve at the time, and what I really wanted was a company that didn't exist, and I wanted to build the company that replicated the team that I built to launch Journey to There, and that's how Produce Your Podcast was born.
Interesting. And so what need did you feel like you were serving at that point? What was your job to do?
So for me, and again, coming from the place of a podcast host, I really wanted a company that I could just show up, record my content, and never have to think about or worry about the other pieces. I didn't want to have to worry about the technology. I didn't want to have to worry about what microphone I should use. I didn't want to worry about editing. I didn't want to worry about any of the things that I knew needed that were really important components of a successful podcast. Initially, when we launched Produce Your Podcast, it was highly focused on the broadcast quality production of audio podcasts. And that, again, over the last 7 years, that is significantly involved and become more involved and evolved as the technology has changed and as the growth of podcasting as a medium has changed and grown from just focusing on audio and video production, expanding that into actually full service marketing initiatives as well. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, the reason I started it was to get my time back and do what it was that I did well at running the business and then have the other parts done by the experts that knew how to run that part of the business.
I think that's so smart. Yeah, makes sense. And it's why we signed up, because we wanted to focus on what we really cared about, which was connecting with experienced strategists and helping them solve big, hairy problems. And the hairy problems we wanted to solve were not, where should we host this podcast or how do we edit this podcast? Because we knew, as you said, there were other experts who knew a lot more about that and who actually enjoyed it.
Yes. And I think working in broadcast radio for so long, my previous chapter of my life, if you will, I ran 12 radio stations that were based out of the Atlanta area, and they were all different formats: rock, pop, country, news talk. We produced the University of Georgia Sports Network. So I was accustomed to running the operations and creative and business development side of creating audio as a storytelling medium, and the business side, the monetization side. So I came into podcasting with a really extensive background. And my vision for Produce Your Podcast was to literally run it in the same way that we operated the radio stations, but just take out radio and insert podcast. And I think that has been really one of the smartest strategies that I implemented, because I had 20 plus years of doing that. So I'd had a lot of ups and downs and trips and falls and successes and failures, if you will, in that 2 decades of experience. So I think that shortcut the learning curve a bit, but it was also an industry that was rapidly changing and is continuing to rapidly change as we're building it. So it's like we're building something as it's changing simultaneously.
Yeah, I always think that's so interesting, right? When the person behind the scenes, right, is tracking all of those nuances, but all we know as consumers or even users of the service is what's happening on the foreground. And so all of that is just sort of happening without us ever being able to see it. Go ahead, Dave.
Right.
Yeah. No, I was going to ask, what exactly do you think made the biggest difference shifting, or let me say this a different way. Other companies out there that were focused on podcasts did not have the radio experience, right? So what made it easier for you, faster for you, or made your clients more successful because you had so much radio experience, do you think?
Well, I think it's 2 parts. I think there's absolutely no question the engineering side, which I give 110% full on credit to Russ Reba, who literally is our producer of this episode right now, because he was able to hone the technology and really be able to.
Those of you watching on YouTube, you could actually see Russ's face for a second. All right. All right.
But he was absolutely instrumental in honing the broadcast quality audio. He was absolutely 100%. Everything about the virtual studio setup, everything about recording remotely. This was all pre-pandemic. Again, just to give everyone a baseline of where we were in the industry. In 2016, when we launched Journey to there were less than 350,000 total podcasts in Apple Podcasts. Now there are over 2.5. If you look at Spotify stats, they claim over 5 million. There's a reason for that, but we can get into that later. But anywhere between 2.5 and 5 million, which I get is a pretty big spread, but that's because they launched a lot of what they called Pod Flash podcasts through their platform Anchor. So the 2.5 million really is a more accurate number. But that level of growth from 350,000 podcasts to over 2.5 million podcasts in a 6 to 7 year window, exponential growth. But and a lot of people pivoted during the pandemic, which actually made remote podcasting and virtual recording even more popular. More technology has evolved since then. But when we launched Produce Your Podcast, that engineering capacity and the technology that Russ was able to hone and really figuring out the processes around that piece of the engineering was really huge. And then secondarily, to your point, Dave, operating a podcast production company like a radio station was one of the best things that we could have done, because we understood the dynamics of not only a quality audio product, but we also understood the dynamics of sponsorships, advertising, formatting of shows, how to capture audience, how to grow audience. We'd been living and dying by the Arbitron numbers in the top 10 market of the country for 20 years. We knew how to play in that space, and we knew how important it was going to be. I had the vision, and I knew that podcasting was going to ultimately be a content creation generating machine, and that you would only have to create the piece of content one time. Now, did I know how that was going to translate into 2023 in terms of how really extensive content creation was going to be imperative to part of a business development plan? No, but I did understand the efficiency of it and what that could be done and how that could be executed. And I think that got us ahead of the curve, but we're still constantly trying to stay ahead of the curve because the curve is like a really twisty, windy road.
Well, and you brought this up slightly, so I want us to double click on it, which is, I think when people sign up to do a podcast, they're like, oh, this will help us tell our story, right? This will help us tell whatever stories we feel like we need to tell as a brand or a storyteller of any kind. But to your point, the real value is in using it as a marketing engine and a content generator. And so is that what drove your pivot into incorporating marketing efforts into your holistic program?
Well, I think one important piece to also mention is that Produce Your Podcast exclusively focuses on business branded podcasts. So that is our niche, that is our vertical, that is what we do. So we don't produce narrative storytelling podcasts. We don't produce comedy podcasts. We don't produce what we call lifestyle podcasts. We work primarily and exclusively with business owners, CMOs, marketers who want to launch a podcast to grow their business, grow their bottom line. So with that niche in place, to answer your question, I think that we wanted to be able to be full service as much as possible and operate like an agency in order to be able to maintain the efficiency that we are providing outside of just the recording and editing process, because you don't really necessarily know until you actually get into creating a podcast that there's so much more to it than just recording on your phone and uploading it to a platform that's free. Those are things that can be done. And I always say start where you are. But if you're building a brand for your business, and podcasting is a great way to do that, you want to do it so that people experience your podcast in the same way they experience the rest of your brand. So it needs to be an extension of you, your personality. It needs to also look and be congruent in how the brand is visually, aesthetically, what they experience on the website, what they experience when they watch it, what they experience when they listen to it. It needs to be a congruent experience. I couldn't control those components if that was being outsourced to a lot of different people. So bringing it into our umbrella enabled us to offer more value and be able to accelerate growth of shows as a result of that.
Amazing. So let's talk about growth. So we've talked about the category growth. We've talked about how you help grow other companies, but where are you in terms of your company's growth and development?
We're in an exciting place. So I mentioned the pandemic was great for podcasting in general. It was also great for us because when everyone entered the virtual world of recording, and Zoom just became massive, and now it's a verb now, or an action word anyway. We were already set up for virtual recording. And so that was something that, again, we were ahead of the space. We have really grown exponentially in terms of the types of businesses that we produce. We have grown in terms of our team. When we very first started out, it was Russ, myself, and a virtual assistant. Now we have a team of launch specialists and a team of client managers and marketing support people and designers. And, it's a much larger team because we needed that level of a team in order to accommodate the level of growth that we are experiencing and to be scalable. So one of the biggest challenges we faced was the scalability of systems and being able to replicate what we were doing so incredibly well with a team of 3 when you start expanding past that, that was a big challenge. And then probably our most recent up leveling of our team, if you will, or taking us to the next level, is we recently hired a chief revenue officer who focuses and is devoted to business development and strategic partnership alliances. And that was a big move for me because that was always my space. But I knew that if we wanted to grow beyond where we were, that was going to take another person who had a much bigger track record than even my previous track record. And so I was really excited about being able to bring what I felt like was the right person to that. And I feel like I'm kind of rambling, so just stop me and ask me any questions because I don't even know. I could.
What I hear you struggling with, and what I really want to do here is get underneath what your big experience challenges are at this stage in your growth. And I'll tell you what I'm hearing, and then you tell me if I'm kind of along the right lines, which is you now have more resources, both human and financial, to invest in your organization. And the big question you're probably asking is, where do I invest these resources for the most impact? Is that fair?
It's fair. I think that I think where I was challenged the most, but you always learn what your challenges are in retrospect, right? So I was so heads down in scalable systems. We have to be able to replicate. We have to be able to replicate. That I actually I handled the business development side of it myself because I was literally fearful of opening up to too many clients and not being able to handle the volume and not be able to deliver it in a way that I felt was what we were built on, which is high touch level customer service. So I'm not really answering your question, and I'm laughing at myself because I asked for this critique, and I'm like, why did I ask for this? But I do think it's important for you to know that what I'm grateful for the time and the energy that I spent in investing in scaling the systems. But in retrospect, if I had to do it differently, I would have invested in the business development person first, and I would have developed the systems parallel tracked, because I think we lost some ground in that 18 months that I was so head down in the system part of it because the technology was changing so fast. So, but that's my own like crazy get up inside my head business owner thought process. Where we are right now actually is idyllic because the systems are there and they're replicatable and we can take volume. But I just now hired the person to bring that volume in. So the resources, again, I've always feel like I'm catching up with the resource side of it. That's why I couldn't answer your question succinctly, because the resources have all been invested up to this point to get us to this place. And now we need the revenue to be able to go to that next level of investing in growth. Oh God, does that make any sense? And please just tear it apart. Break it down, build it up.
Well, there is a word or a couple of words that you keep using in here that I think thematically are pointing us in the direction we want to go, which is you're using words like sustainable and scalable a lot, right? So how do I grow and how do I maintain the intimacy, the level of service, the long-term relationships as I grow meaningfully? To me, this is all coming back to the same question, which is how do you add the most value for your customers? And what do you do? How do you build these relationships in the way that's the most impactful and lasting so that you're continuously adding the value that your customers need through the services that you provide? And my gut is, without a ton of research and doing this sort of felt sense applied founder research that you've done and that I have done and that I love, right? You've gotten on your gut a ton of insight about what your customers value through these really intimate conversations, through getting to know them, through their feedback. And yet you haven't necessarily had the scale to fully validate these or to quantify the impact. And to me, I think you are at a beautiful position to start to really understand at scale what is time well spent. And I'm using that phrase very intentionally because that is a framework and a methodology that we use for understanding customer value and impact. And I'd love to hand it over to Dave to talk a little bit about maybe some of the questions that he asks clients in order to help them understand what it means for their customer. How does that sound, Traci?
Oh, perfect. I mean, I'm open. Like I said, even off the mic before this, I was like, I want you guys to just like workshop me to death because I love to learn. I love to grow. And I am obsessed with customer experience, which can be a blessing and a curse when you're trying to.
Well, and it's really easy to get distracted by an N of one. One vocal person says something is important and it feels really important, especially when you're a high service person. And so what we want to do is get to the answers that mean the most to the most people in the most moments, right? And really actively provide value. All right, Dave, over to you.
Sure. So, Traci, listening to you and being a client of yours, right? It's kind of a unique situation that we find ourselves in, Aransas and I, because we work with your team on a regular basis and we see what you're doing. I was thinking about my own journey as you guys were talking. Never really wanted to be on a podcast because I wasn't really all that confident in my own abilities to communicate. And then I found Aransas and she's perfect for the job and I can kind of work off of her and kind of build on what she's doing. I knew my own kind of process that I was going through. And so I'm going to try to bring that lens as well. But let's talk about time well spent here for a second. Time well spent from and we're gonna kind of take the lens of measurement. You've already described that you're scalable now. You've got lots of things that are going well for you. The key question I think we have to address is: do your customers feel like this is time well spent? And so from a measurement standpoint, we might ask three questions. These are the three questions that we're currently very excited about. And we've done quite a bit of research around. We actually have an academic piece that's coming out here in April time period, somewhere around there. So we're excited about these questions. We think they work very well. The first one is, what is the job that your customer is trying to get done? Okay. And you've kind of described that as, I want to be about content. I want to be about getting my brand story out there, creating content, and so forth. Is that the job that you see the customer needing to be getting done for Produce Your Podcast?
Is that what they're hiring you for?
I think they are. I think each client has a different why for why they want to start a podcast. But I think when they fundamentally identify what that why is, it comes back to, I want to be a subject matter expert. I want to be a thought leader. And we use the terminology, I want to use the podcast to change the conversation in my industry. And I want to do that by being a subject matter expert and or a thought leader. And so the best way to achieve that is through creating content. The most efficient way to create content is to record a podcast episode and then have it repurposed into multiple different areas of distribution.
Okay, so actually what you did when you were describing that is you talked about the aspirational job that they're trying to do, which is change the conversation that's going on. But then you also talked about the functional job, which is create a podcast in the most efficient way possible. And I would guess, a lot of what you're trying to do around scalability is around that functional job of trying to make it as efficient as possible. But I also heard you say some things that maybe suggest that you're also focused on helping them to change the conversation. Now, as a
and change the
client of
perception of
yours,
them, right? They
right,
are being transformed from business leader to
which
subject
is a
matter
social
expert.
job. Yeah, which is a social job. So
Mhm.
change the perception of how I am seen in the industry. Now, as a client of yours, who has worked with you now for, what is this? We're 2 years
Couple
in, 3
years, yeah.
years. Who's counting,
Who's
right?
counting?
Right. Time before Experience Strategy podcast, time after Experience Strategy. We restarted things, right? So, where I'm at early in my journey, it was about learning how to be effective, right? But as I get further along, I feel like we are more and more confident about the content that we're creating. And what we're interested now in is very different than what we were interested in when we first started. And I think a lot of your clients are going to be the same. And you kind of suggested where companies like us might be in their journey. And I want to suggest to you that the next job that you need to get done for companies that you've been working with for some period of time is to understand how they grow their business, how they grow their visibility. And in particular around podcasts, it's what's working across your clients. What is working? Why are certain clients having more success? That's the kind of information now that I feel like I've got my legs underneath me, and I'm not afraid to say all the time, because Russ is going to take out most of those ums and just leave a few that make me sound like that country lawyer that I want to be, like so I'm much more comfortable with what it is that I'm trying to do. But where I want to go next is I want to scale myself, right? Just like you've scaled your company, our company wants to scale as well. And we're hoping that you have that information, that you can tell us where we should go next, not necessarily where everybody else is going and who else is being successful, but based on what you're seeing from us. What recommendations would you have for us on where to go next? Now, that may be a little bit aspirational for you and may not be where you want to focus right now, but I can see that in
We're
the
both
future
laughing
for
because
you.
that's exactly where they have been working. And so I think to the credit of research, right? All research is not quant. It is, so much of the work that we do is through deep interviews. And their new CFO, the second she walked in the door, started reaching out to clients and saying, hey, let's talk, right? Great leadership skill. And we talked, and that's exactly what I said. And I think that's exactly what their other customer said, because then she came back and she said, hey, what I've heard is you want to learn from each other and you want us to really help you grow. So they're tuned into that. And so I think really what the next stage is, and I'm sorry, I'm speaking for you, Traci, just because I want to make sure we sort of keep moving forward in what you need here. So I think you're at the point now of saying, okay, yep, I know what my clients need. They want our support growing. We're ready to do that because we want to invest our energy in the places that matters most to the clients we have and those we want. Sure. So then I think if we go back to these questions, right? So the first question is, what are the jobs to be done? Starting with those functional jobs and then thinking about what those aspirational jobs are and how you can better help your customers achieve their aspirational jobs. But then what's next in the process, Dave?
So once you've identified the jobs to be done, the next element in the time well spent framework is to start thinking about, well, the level of engagement that the customer has with you. And in particular, these are your podcast hosts that you're working with. And I would argue that it is the guests that they bring on as well. And of course, engagement is an interesting thing to try to measure. There's an easy question that you can ask in most cases, and it might be one that you want to use here which is how enjoyable was the experience for you, right? What makes the experience enjoyable for you? And that's a question that you can ask on a regular basis. But there's different types of engagement. What does it feel like? How does it feel to be in podcast mode? Might be a different way to ask the same question around enjoyability. You're trying to understand, are they enjoying the experience itself? Not just did it save them time so that they could focus on the things that they wanted to do, but do they like Russ? Do they like Elise? Are they engaged with these different people? How do they feel about working with the podcast website that they have? You have all of these different touch points, and you want to know, can you map it out for me? How engaged are you? And if you see that drop, then you know that maybe there's something going on with the way that you've scaled that's causing them not to enjoy it. Okay, so that's number 2. Engagement.
So let's pause there for a second. I want to give Traci a second with that one, because I'm curious for you, Traci, and I think you're so right on, Dave, and this is super exciting, this idea of understanding both her customers' engagement as well as their customers' engagement, right? So it's the companies that she works with, the host, and the listeners. So what do you believe would be possible for you and for Produce Your Podcast if you felt like you deeply understood what engagement drivers were for both your host and their audiences?
Well, I think any knowledge that you get around engagement and client experience is always amazing feedback to adjust and grow, right? So we are constantly trying to improve upon and make the process of podcasting, removing any of the friction that happens for the podcast host. And friction can be defined as technology friction. It can also be defined as just resistance to showing up. So one of the things that works so well about having a scheduled session with a live engineer to record your podcast is because you do remove a lot of the technology friction that's gone because you have the engineer to support you with that. But the other piece of that is not to be underestimated is if you think about it like a personal trainer, for example. Like, I don't know about you guys, but creating content really isn't my most favorite thing to do until I'm actually doing it. And then I'm like in my zone and I'm happy and I'm great at it. But it's the same as working out. I'm always glad that I worked out after I did it. But the level of procrastination and mental gymnastics that I can play with myself prior to that is really pretty phenomenal. And the same happens, especially with podcast recording, because you're using your voice. Your voice is a very vulnerable place. And with video component coming in now, there's a lot of camera ready aspects. So having that appointment to record is a really good insurance policy that you're going to stay committed to creating the content of your podcast. So I think we try to focus on literally part 1 of what you were saying, Dave, of keeping your podcast sustainable is removing friction for your experience of getting that podcast created. And then secondarily, I love what you said about, because, once that's removed from you, and that's where you guys are in your journey, that's removed from you. You know how to, you have it all down, right? So the growth aspect, I think, is incredibly important. And I think that's what we did do when we brought Stephanie on. And she reached out to every single one of our clients. She did one-on-one, either phone or Zoom chats, and said, what is it that you need from us? Like, what aren't we doing? Because we're so functional. We are so functional in terms of that piece. What can we do that's going to really make you want to continue to work with us? Because production can become a commodity, and there are different price points associated with it. We understand that. So where can we bring value? Where can we bring value? And that's where we implemented the growth acceleration program that we're just rolling out based on the feedback of clients like you that said, we want more We want more.
So,
That's what they say. We want more.
Yeah. So, yeah. And interesting again, you started out by saying that we want to remove the friction. But then you ended by saying what would keep you more engaged. And this is a similar journey that a lot of companies go on, where they think that engagement is principally about removing friction. And I don't disagree. We don't want friction. Nobody wants friction. But the reason we don't ask a question like, were we able to eliminate the friction for you, is because that's not ultimately what keeps people engaged. What keeps them engaged is, did they enjoy the last experience that they had? And enjoyment is multidimensional. It's not just about the functional. So you have to be able to do more than just remove friction. So I would look at you probably have focused a lot on the scalability of the technology, the scalability of the processes. I would look at the scalability of the enjoyment and see what that looks like. Yeah, and in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to the last piece that we look at, and that is time value. We're recording this. It's a mid-morning on a Wednesday, I think. I only know it's Wednesday because tomorrow's Thursday, and I have a 2-hour workshop that I'm preparing for. So I have to switch from working on the workshop to doing my podcast. And the value of this particular time is really important to me. It's the middle of the day when I'm usually working with people. And every single one of your clients is in the same situation. So one of the key questions that we often ask, and you might want to ask, is, did the time feel like it was well spent? Did you actually feel like the time was well spent? And oftentimes it is for us. We see a lot of value in it, particularly when we've had a good client, or I'm sorry, a good guest on. Mm-hmm. A good guest on who has helped us to kind of further the conversation. That's probably the number one factor, I would say, in whether or not we feel like it's a good experience, is whether we enjoyed the guest that we worked with. But ultimately, it is only time well invested for us if people listen, right? Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a direct correlation between, was that time well spent for me or time well invested, and the number of listeners, which kind of takes us full circle back to, we want to know that somehow we're getting help and assistance to move us forward, and growing our audience and engaging our audience. So I think you're exactly in the right spot where you need to be. I hope those 3 ideas have kind of helped you.
Yeah. And what I would say, Traci, if I may, again, in the interest of time, I'm going to just jump in here with some ideas that are coming up as we're talking. What we're talking about here is asking your customers the right questions. So pretty much every company that's doing any research is asking their customer the Net Promoter Score question. It's famous, it's popularized, it's wildly overused, and often data that's frankly, from a customer perspective, meaningless. And we've done some significant research to understand how customers think about Net Promoter Score. In your case, if I'm going to refer you, yes, that I would refer you. I have referred you. So great. The Net Promoter Score would be high. But does that mean that I'm having a valuable experience and that I will stay with you? Maybe not. There are other better questions that would get you to that answer, like, was this a good use of your time? Are you seeing the impacts you want? Right? There are a few key questions, and I already intuitively know what they are and have them all written in my head. So we'll talk afterward about that. But I think really there are 3 to 5 questions you could ask every single one of your hosts every week to radically improve the aim of your experience strategy. So where you're investing your team's time and energy and innovation. You have a perfect system built for asking those questions. Because after every one of these episodes, what do? I go in and I fill out an episode form.
Oh, that's so true.
While I'm there, ask me if I'm happy. Ask me if I'm enjoying it. Ask me if, right? It's a little harder to get to my listeners. Okay, but we can fix that. That's easy enough. But you've already got a direct line of communication with me systematized into your process. So ask me if it's working. And then if it's not, you have an early alarm to know. And so by doing that, you are getting data across all of your clients, and you're getting individual data for that really high touch response that you want to create or continue, especially as you have more onboarding specialists and you have more people who are touching your clients. This will give you the data that you need to feel really confident that this growing team is servicing your customers the way you would.
Yeah, I wonder, Traci, if you might be interested in being a part of this pilot program that we're running for a number of companies that just looks at those types of questions. So maybe that's something we can talk about as well. I'm excited for you.
Yes. We don't even have to talk about it. The answer is yes. I'm happy to do that.
We have so many conversations to continue.
I mean, I think this is so valuable for me during this window of time of exactly where we are, because like I was saying before, one of my challenges that I felt like in looking back in retrospect was focusing so much time on the processes, so much time on Dave, what you're saying is the functionality piece of Produce Your Podcast, and focusing so much on reducing that friction for the recording experience and the client manager experience and the releasing of the episodes themselves. We grew over these last 7 years almost 85% based, maybe even closer to 90% based on referrals, Aransas. So I have always valued that significantly, but I've always known too that that's not necessarily the way to grow to the levels that I think we're capable of. Yeah. One of the things that I said to Holly, who oversees all of our operations, I said, we've tested our systems. Now our systems are about to be tested. And that's where we are right now. And that and we're focusing on so much cold outreach and marketing efforts outside of just referrals. So we have a different client that's coming into our fold now. When people were coming through referrals, they already were primed for success, if you will, based on, yes. So it's been an interesting transition these last 6 months as we've shifted our marketing efforts. And then to your point also, Dave, I think us really now having to go as an agency to a growth accelerator phase, what does that really mean? Because everybody's definition of growth, everybody's definition of the number of downloads that they want to see, what their podcast, how they define success of their podcast as an ROI is different. But I feel like we would be irresponsible based on the level of expertise we have on our team, not to tap into that to help businesses grow their bottom line, and having podcasting be a part of that. And that's where we are right now. So I think piloting would be great if we're in a good position to be able to bring value to you.
Let's do that. And I will say the other thing that we're doing here when we're exploring these questions with people is we're raising awareness actually to the value that you're bringing, because so much of what your work has done is it takes the friction out. It puts it into the background so that I don't have to think about it. But if I'm not thinking about it, I'm not appreciating it. And so part of what I want you to do is I want you to resurface reflection so that you are front of mind. Your value is front of mind to me as a customer. And I can appreciate all the million things that your team is doing for me that I never want to do myself. And give you the value, the credit for the value that you're adding. All right. I know we're short on time. So quick recap here. If you are in a place of growth, for any company and any category, it's a time to ask yourself what your jobs to be done are currently, the modes that your customer is in and how you can support those modes, that mindset and set of behaviors that you are servicing there, what the value of time is to them, and whether or not you are effectively meeting those needs. And I missed a question, Dave. What was it?
Engagement. So
engagement.
You want the job
is
to be
enjoyable?
done, level of engagement. Yeah, right.
You'd think I ask these all day. So you want to ask really powerful, targeted questions. And if, like Traci, you are out there running a business that could use some support with your experience strategy as you grow and scale, reach out to us, stonemantle.co. We have a quick, easy link there to chat with us, and one of our team will be back to you almost instantly. This is what we love to do to help companies do and be better for their companies and for their company. So thank you, Traci, for being so candid and open and committed to our value and our experience and to your company's growth. We are so excited to watch what you do and are just so invested in you and produce your podcast, and so thrilled to be a part of your family and so grateful for all you've done for our show. To all of you listening, thank you for listening. We'll see you over at stonemantle.co to chat more about your experience strategy.
And thank you. So valuable. I got so much value out of this today. You've given me a lot to think about. So cheers to growth.
Thank you for listening to the Experience Strategy Podcast. If you're having fun nerding out with us, please follow and share wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Find more episodes and continue the conversation with us at experiencestrategypodcast.com.